What's going on, fam? About to jump into this Oahspe. Got turned on to it, watching the Cosmon show and some other things. Do this one. Zoom it in. Oahspe, practical guidebook to the spiritual life. That's the one. Share the screen. All right, so Oahspe, practical guidebook to the spiritual life, standard edition in modern American language. It starts. You have a corporeal body and a spiritual body. Hear me, and I will open your understanding. I come to free not only the corporeal man, but the spiritual man. Yet with your freedom, you also attain to responsibility, so that sooner or later, your fidelity to your creator and to your fellow man in righteousness, love, and good works shall become the most sacred study of your life. Your God does not come in this era as a dictator, but as your elder brother with ample experience, right? Nor do I command saying, you shall believe, because I, your God, have said it or revealed it in this book. Nevertheless, through Oahspe, light of Jehovah, the Creator, is revealed to man, and man is to judge himself and labor to save himself, so that by this he may have honor and glory. For the will of the Creator is not for man to be forever led, but for man to ultimately have the light of practicing good works organically from infancy up. Yeah. That's good. Oahspe, a primary for the spiritual and practical enlightenment and development of individuals, groups, and humanity for their glory and happiness, and for the glory of the whole. In the words of Jehovah and his angel ambassadors, being a Cosmon Bible. So let's see what's in it. Containing a history of the dominions of the higher and lower heavens on the earth for the past 25,000 years. That's a cycle. Being from the submersion of the continent of Pan in the Pacific Ocean, commonly called the flood or deluge, to the Cosmon era, the present time. Also, a brief history of the preceding years, from man's beginning on earth to the flood, together with a synopsis of the cosmogony of the universe, the creation of the planets, the creation of man, the unseen worlds, the labor and glory of gods and goddesses in the heavens of the earth and in the ethereal heavens above them, right? With the new commandments of Jehovah to man of the present day, and other revelations from the second resurrection, formed in words in the 33rd year of the Cosmon era. You know, when you see that 33rd, that's a master number, like 11 and 22. 33rd, that's some Masonic shit, but we're going to keep on going because of the significance alone. So this present edition being placed into modern American language, being an extraction, compilation, and integration of materials from the first published edition, copyright 1882, by John Barlow, Newbrough, right, 1882. That's a little before my great-great-grandfather was born, the first Jerry Bilbo, who was born in 1885. So this was popping off as he was growing up. And from the second published edition, published in 1891, copyright 1882 by John Barlow Newbrough, copyright 1910 by Justine Barlow Newbrough, copyright 1935 by E. Wing Anderson, and from extant pre-1882, Oahspe source materials, and from the heavens of Jehovah, right? This new edition being placed into the public domain in 159 AK, Anno Cosmon, being the year 2007 of the common civil calendar, all right? So 159 Anno Cosmon was in 2007. It's now 2024, 17 years later. Makes this 176 AK. 176 AK, if my math is right. All right. So we're going to call this year AK 176 to add to the other two calendars. You got the Oahspe table of contents, right? You got Tay's Prayer, Oahspe Prologue, Voice of Man, Book of Jehovah, Book of Sethantes, Son of Jehovah, First Book of the First Lords, Book of Oahspe, Son of Jehovah, Second Book of Lords, Synopsis of 16 Cycles, the Book of Ap, Son of Jehovah, or Appa, the Lord's First Book, the Book of Su, Son of Jehovah, the Lord's Second Book, and you got the Book of Apollo, Son of Jehovah, the Lord's Third Book, You got the book of Thor, son of Jehovah, the Lord's fourth book. And you got the book of Osiris, son of Jehovah, the Lord's fifth book. You got the book of Fragapati, son of Jehovah, book of God's word, book of divinity, book of Serpenta, Artemis, D of Jehovah, first book of God, book of wars against Jehovah, book of Leica, son of Jehovah, book of the Ark of Bond, God's book of Esquire, book of Es, daughter of Jehovah, Bond's book of praise, book of Oranathan, book of judgment, book of discipline, book of inspiration, book of Sapa, Sapa prologue, ancient languages section, tree of language, language primaries subsection, right? B3 pronunciation guide, B4 the signature, B5 panic, etc. primaries, B6 tablet of Ahiyad Zan, language groups, section C, Pine, section D, tablets of Seamoin, E, tablet of Bieni, F, Ahin tablet, G, key language tablet, H, M, Agatu, H, 1 through 4 is the preamble, H5, M, Agatu tablet, I is evolution of Israel language subsection, 1 is the tablet of 0, 1 2 tablet of is or as or eyes, 1 3 tablet of eyes and ziri, 1 4 tablet of eyes ziri, 1 5 Kodet eyes or divine seal, condensed history section. Then you got J, the Ihin and Ihuan chief tribes. K, the basis of the Ezra Bible, history of the East subsection. L, Ahura Mazda. M, basis of Vedi. N, lords, gods, and officers of the heavenly hosts. O, Faithis, early history. Then you got historical rites and ceremonies section. P, Funisi. Q, Arabania, Hiyat Stoyi. R, Hoed. S, sun degree ceremonies. T, Kai ceremonies. U, Port Pan Algonquin. V, Anubis. W, Algonquin. X, Bo, Gan, God, Emeta Chaba. There's that Bo, as in Bilbo. Y is Migitao. Z, Haidang. AA is Mhak. BB is Chamber of Adepts. CC, Chamber of Prophecy. Then you got 36, God's Book of Ben. 37, Book of Knowledge. 38, Book of Cosmogony and Prophecy. 39, Book of Jehovah's Kingdom on Earth. 40, Miscellanea, glossary, images, TOC, index available separately. That's what's in this Oahspe. Then you got the image list, which I ain't going to read, but it's a lot. All right. And then we get to the first chapter, Tay's Prayer. Chapter 1, Tay's Prayer. Oh, 1:1:1. Jehovah, the Creator, said, I blow my breath upon the planet, and man comes forth, inquiring, who am I, and what is my destiny? It says, for the footnote, when Oahspe uses the word man, as here, it refers to the human personage, whether male or female. It can also refer to the race of humankind. This generic meaning of man is occasionally reinforced by the use of parentheses, as in your son, parentheses, your daughter, close parentheses. In those instances where Oahspe uses man, he, him, his to mean male human only, the context makes it clear. All right. It continues. So I send an elder brother of man to teach him and show him the light. God said, behold me, O man. And you see some footnotes. Behold is perceive, look at, observe, discern. O man, the word O, as in O man or O Jehovah, is a simplified construction of the word O and is used extensively throughout Oahspe. All right. So behold me, O man, I am an elder brother. I have passed through death and found the glory of the unseen worlds. Jehovah gave to me, your God, dominion over the earth and her heavens. Man said, I have found truth in corpore, physicality. I know I live, that trees grow and die. This is true knowledge. Give me truth regarding the unseen in a way that I can prove is truth. And in the stirring up of man's soul, Jehovah spoke through his sons and daughters. For the Creator has had many names and is also feminine, as will be explained later in Oahspe. All right. So let's continue. And in the stirring up of man's soul, Jehovah spoke through his sons and daughters. His voice came up out of the marsh and down from the heavens above. And the children of men heard, and they saw, and rose up because of the Spirit in them. They responded to him, who is almighty, and their voices were called Tai, Tai. because as it is the universal word of all children born, so it represents the universal prayer of man, parentheses, humankind, close parentheses. Tai, tai, tai. Because as it is the universal word of all children born, so it represents the universal prayer of man, humankind. Tai, tai. You know, them sounds that your baby make early on, like I'm listening to my niece make, newly born, Julia. So Tai said, reveal, O Father, give me light. I see the wide earth, the sun, moon, and stars, but the great vault of heaven appears to be just an empty sky. Where is the dwelling place of the dead, the place of the souls of men? Fifth note is place means home, residence, domicile. It continues in verse 8. In times past, you have quickened seers and prophets, and through them lifted up your children and proclaimed other worlds. Am I less worthy than those of past ages? All the while my forefathers, and now I, have abided by your mighty presence. By is successfully lived with, endured, remained with, conformed to, undergone, borne up under, withstood your mighty presence. Verse 9, by your own hand you have quickened my consciousness to be dissatisfied with the old revelations and made me peer deeper into the cause and place of things, and to desire further light from your holy place. Thing 7, the why and where of things. Right? Verse 10, by your power, my manhood, parentheses, womanhood, close parentheses, has been raised up. Only by your power and wisdom will I be appeased, meaning satisfied, brought to peace and calm. When I was a child, I believed as a child because it was told to me. But now that I am grown, I desire to know who your prophets were and how they attained their gifts and wisdom of words. Right? Verse 12, the cosmogony you taught in ancient times was sufficient for that day, but now I am raised up by you to receive comprehensive knowledge of the sun and the stars, of other worlds, and of their travel in your great firmament, which is the world of space between the stars and planets. That's from the 1891 glossary, sky, heaven, etc. Let me pause for a sec. All right, so let's get a little bit of background on the author of the Oahspe, called here Dr. Newbrough, author of Oahspe, a sacred history of the dominions of the earth for the past 24,000 years. This article was from the San Pedro News Pilot, Volume 9, number 260, 2nd of January, 1937. Right. The article was written by Whit Wellman. 1. It says a group of the best known Egyptian gods worshipped before the dawn of Christianity. It says scientists puzzled for generations. How did the Egyptians build the Great Pyramid, that vast structure which the years have shadowed in mystery? What were the mechanics of its construction? How were gigantic stone slabs moved to the site and set in place without machinery? Only in recent years have Egyptologists uncovered a few scant facts about this pyramid of Giza. And even today, this tomb of the pharaohs conceals age-old secrets of life and death. This is 1937 now. A fact more amazing than scientists' discoveries is that everything recently learned of this massive pile agrees with the detailed account of the Great Pyramid given in Oahspe. You hear that? A fact more amazing than scientists' discovery is that everything recently learned at this massive pile agrees with the detailed account of the Great Pyramid given in Oahspe. A huge volume of curious information written by Dr. Newbrough 55 years ago as of that writing. The author had never been to Egypt. He had no access to special knowledge of the ancient world. His astonishing accuracy in describing what were then unknown truths, the building of the Great Pyramid, the number of workmen employed, the length of time required to build it, the source of materials used, and the purpose of, quote, the greatest building that has ever been on earth, end quote, has been explained by the statement that Oahspe purports to be a, quote, book of Revelation, a clear example of so-called automatic writing, end quote, transmitted through Dr. Newbrough to his typewriter by some higher intelligence or spirit control, right? The famous Orientalist and scholar Max Muller has said that, quote, there existed no known sources from which the information given could have been obtained. And had there been such sources, it would have taken the combined life labor of 20 men to cull and edit the material. All right. That's a quote. It says, Oahspe required 50 weeks to write. Took 50 weeks to write it. $350 days. Dr. Newbrough's statement of his experience is as strange as the book itself, which contains over 800 pages of small type. Quote, I was directed to get a typewriter. This I did, and applied myself industriously to learn it, but with indifferent success. Quote, one morning after 2 years, the light struck both my hands on the back, and they went for the typewriter, right? For some 15 minutes, very rigorously or vigorously. I was told not to read what was printed, and I had worked myself into such a religious fear of losing this new power that I obeyed reverently. The next morning, before sunrise, the same power came and wrote again. All right. Again, I laid the matter away very religiously, saying very little about it to anybody. It says, one morning I looked out the window and beheld a line of light that rested on my hands, extending heavenward like a telegraph wire toward the sky. He said, over my head were three pairs of hands, fully materialized. Behind me stood another angel with her hands on my shoulders. My looking did not disturb the scene. My hands went right on printing. Quote, for 50 weeks, this continued every morning, half an hour or so before sunrise, and then it ceased. And I was told to read and publish Oahspe. The peculiar drawings in Oahspe were made with pencil in the same way. All this while I pursued my avocation, dentistry. Right? He did all this while he was doing dentistry. Nor has this matter, nor my diet, vegetables, fruit, and farinaceous food detracted any from my health or strength, although I have continued this discipline for upward of 10 or more years. What is farinaceous food before we go any further? Farinaceous. Farinaceous is an adjective of or pertaining to flour or meal. From late Latin, farinaceous. From Latin, farina, flour, meal. See, farina. That's how I used to eat. I was reading that from the etymology online dictionary. Dun, 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 dun. Do I have a dictionary open? Come on, just trying to get a example. My pills.
You want to put it up here on the refrigerator?
Yeah, appreciate it. Aaronaceous. It's just not going to give it to me. Anyway, he was eating cornmeal, basically, farina. So he was eating vegetables, fruit, and cornmeal type foods. And he continued doing that for 10 more years. In addition to this aptitude for automata writing, the author gradually became a nationally recognized medium and produced remarkable oil paintings in a totally dark room, painting with both hands at once. Portraits. This is all about Dr. Newbrough. Automatic writings. And these are the pictures that he drew as well. What's going on out there?
Are you recording?
All right, so getting back to this Dr. Newbrough and what they were saying about him in 1937. All right. So he became a nationally recognized medium and produced more remarkable oil paintings in a totally dark room, painting with both hands at once, painting ambidextrously. It says these portraits were pictures of the prophets and teachers. Zarathustra, Abraham, Po of China, Brahma of India, and many others. The original manuscript itself, together with most of his automatic oil paintings, were stored in a house in El Paso, Texas. A cloudburst swept down into the city, filling the basement with water and adobe mud, ruining the portraits and manuscripts. The original plates of the first edition of Oahspe, however, still exist, and proofs for publication were read by Dr. Newbrough before his death in 1891. All right. You hear that? Cloudburst came down into the city, filling the basement with water and adobe mud, and it ruined the portraits and manuscripts, the original plates of the first edition of Oahspe, however, still exist. These were the original manuscripts, or the original manuscript itself, together with most of his automatic oil paintings that were stored in the house in El Paso that got hit with the cloudburst. But it says the original plates of the first edition of Oahspe, however, still exist, right? And proofs for publication were read by Dr. Newbrough, who was dead in 1891. It says Oahspe goes back in history for 78,000 years, giving an account of the origin of man, a synopsis covering a period of 48,000 years, from the creation of man down to the submersion of the continent of Pan some 24,000 years ago. From then until the present, it sketches a history of the earth and its connection with the quote unquote spirit world. It gives detailed accounts of the origins of religious systems, the mythologies of different races, the derivations of languages, the causes of the rise and fall of civilizations, the numerous prophecies for the future, right? That's all in this book that we're about to get into, or the PDF of the book. Its graphic story of the actual building of the Great Pyramid was first published, or was the first published account of that Egyptian puzzle. History records that Egypt was first settled 5,600 years ago by the ancient Persians, who migrated from their native land because of famine and drought. For a time, Persia governed Egypt as a tributary, but the allegiance was soon broken, and the Valley of the Nile became an independent kingdom. Dun, 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 dun. So, like I said, for a time, Persia governed Egypt as a tributary, but the allegiance was soon broken, and the Valley of the Nile became an independent kingdom. The style of Oahspe is biblical throughout. In some chapters, it follows history closely. In others, it appears to reveal past events so far undiscovered by historians. All right. And during this short period, the shepherd kings migrated into Egypt in vast numbers, and in sympathy with these and of kindred faith were the followers of Abraham, the Faithists, who also migrated rapidly into Egypt. Quote, meantime, the kingdom had passed from Rebekah to her oldest son, HUWA'AM, and to his oldest son, Naaman, and to his oldest son, Sev, and to his daughter, Admah, and to her oldest son, Hatha, and to his oldest son, Rotsag. Another verse describes how King Rotsag wrote the history of the creation of heaven and earth with the origin of sin and the creation of man, and presented it to the libraries of Egypt. So it came to pass that through the oracles, King Rotsag bestowed upon the libraries of Egypt the history of the creation of heaven and earth, with the origin of sin and the creation of man, the first of whom was thence after called Adam, instead of Asu, adopting the Parsian word instead of the Vedic. Ezra, the compiler of the Old Testament, was supposed to have taken the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent from the early Jews. But Oahspe relates, quote, in these records, King Rotsag were the same from which Ezra, 3,000 years afterward, made selections and erroneously attributed them to the doctrines of the Faithists, who were called Israelites. And the records of the Faithists were not kept nor permitted in the state records, but kept amongst the Faithists themselves, for they were outlawed then, even as they are to this day, because they would not adopt the saviors and gods of the state. All right. It said the fight of Abraham and his people, most of whom were escaped slaves into Egypt to avoid the persecutions of the Persian rulers. is especially interesting. It said, God spake to Abram, saying, Fear not, for men of learning, neither grieve thou for the learning in books. When they are forgotten, thy words and thy labors will overspread the world. End quote. And another quote, and God lived with Abram, teaching him and working miracles through him. And it came to pass that the Listians in their rambles, selling wares, told the slaves of the kings about the wonders of Abram. Quote, and the slaves fled from bondage and went into the wilderness in search of Abram. And when they came before him, he spake unto them day by day as they came, saying, God brought you man of himself, doeth nothing. Search then the records of your generations, for ye are descended from the faithest of old. So Abram led them thence and came into Lower Haldlutz. And it came to pass that in the next year, after they departed out of Sheadawan, a famine came upon the land, and the enemies of God were cut off and could not pursue Abram and his people. It was hundreds of years later that Thutmose, who was the king, who was to build the Great Pyramid, became king of Egypt. Apparently, his persecutions of the Israelites was more severe than the hardships suffered in Persia. Thutmose decreed their banishment. He called his army to drive them out, and according to Oahspe, 300,000 were put to death and 3 million were driven out after their possessions had been confiscated. There remained in Egypt some 2 million Israelites and shepherd kings who were promptly declared slaves, right? Check out the story. It is interesting to note that much the same action is being taken by Hitler in Germany today. This was during that time. One of the predictions of this strange book to be fulfilled, right? And that's where it ties into the U's. Continuing on, Osiris then instructed King Thutmose to drive out of the land of Egypt all the faithless, especially the shepherd kings who could not be made slave of. Thutmose impressed an army of warriors and drove off the shepherd kings, putting to death more than 3 million of them. And from the faithless he took all their possessions, such as houses and lands, and suffered them not to hold any mortal thing in possession, neither permitting them to till the soil, save as servants. And there went out of the land of Egypt to escape the tyranny of Thutmose, 3 million. Sounds also like what happened in America. What up, son? and slow. All right. All right, continuing. All right. 3 million. Faithless, including the shepherd kings, the unlearned. And in regard to the faithless who remain in the land of Egypt, Osiris, through King Thotma, made the following laws, to wit, quote, thou shalt not possess any land, nor house, nor ox, nor any beast of burden, nor cow, nor calf, nor shall thy people possess an altar of worship, nor temple, nor place of sacred dance. But a servant and a servant of servants shalt thou be all the days of thy life. But in thy sleeping place and in the sleeping place of thy family, thou shalt do worship in thine own way. Nor shall any man molest thee therein. Generations later, the descendants of these 2 million slaves were led out of Egypt by Moses. And by that time, their number had increased to 3,750,000. From the time Moses began to put on foot the migration of Israel until he reached Shechelmarath was 4 years, 207 days. And the number of Israelites that thus went forth out of Egypt was 3,750,000 men, women, and children. And the number of other people who accompanied them was 400,000. And because they were of the uncircumcised tribes of ancients, the Hebrews nicknamed them Levites, i.e., imperfect flesh. That's an end quote. When Thutmose began his great pyramid, over half of his workers were faithless who had remained in Egypt. And it came to pass that Thutmose began the building of the pyramid of Osiris, the Great Pyramid, and he impressed 200,000 men and women in the building thereof, of which number more than one half were faithless. And these laborers were divided into groups of 12 and 24s and 48s, and so on. And each group had a captain. But for a series of groups of 1,728 men and women, there were generals. And for every 6 generals, there was one marshal. And for every 12 generals, one chief. And these chiefs were of the privy council of the king. Evidently, Thutmose kept strict watch upon the tremendous labor, for his plans were carefully made and executed. And the king allotted to every chief a separate work, some to dig canals, some to quarry stone, and some to hew stones, some to build boats, some to provide rollers, and others timbers, and yet others capstans. It goes on to say, so when Oahspe was written, archaeologists could not determine where the materials used for the Great Pyramid were secured. But from Dr. Newbrough's typewriter came this description, quote, 2 places the surveyors found stone with which to build the temple. One was above the banks of the great river Egon at the foot of Mount Hazekah, and the other was across the plains of Neuf in the mountains of Awakaba. From the headwaters of Egon, a canal was made to Awakaba, and thence by locks descended to the plains of Neuf, and thence to Gakir, the place chosen by the king for the temple to be built. And as for the logs used in the building, they were brought down the waters of Egon, even from the forests of Gambata and Rucksack. These logs were tied together and floated on the water to the place required, where, by means of capstans, they were drawn out of the water ready for use. As for the stones of the temple, they were hewn in the region of the quarries, and when properly dressed, were placed on slides and capstans, and then by capstans let down the mountainsides to the water, whereon they were to float to the place required for them. The floats were made of boards sawed by men skilled in the work, and were of sufficient length and width to carry the burden designed. And at the bottom of the floats were rollers, gudgeoned at the ends. When a stone was let down from the place of its hewing onto the float, it was ready to be carried to its destination. And when the float thus arrived near Gakir, ropes made of hemp and flax were fastened to the boat, and by means of capstans on the land, the float was drawn up an inclined plane out of the water, the rollers of the float answering as wheels. Thus, according to Oahspe, were the materials brought to the place where thousands of slaves driven by whips could set them in place. King Thutma himself attended the ceremony and laid the foundation. When all things were in readiness for building the temple, the king, being learned in all philosophies, proceeded to lay the foundation and to give instruction as to the manner of building it. Here is the detailed account of how the Great Pyramid was built, a description which might have been written by a skilled engineer familiar with each difficult construction problem. Right? This is what's in Oahspe. This article you can read yourself. I'll put it in the description. A link in the description to it. All right? Because it's long. It's a long article going into that part about the period. Well, no, I guess I'm almost at the end. So let's continue on. Oh. Square the compass and the plumb and line. Right? Masonic talk. Anyway, I'm zoning out over here. You can read this article yourself. See, it's a long article. I was getting to the end of it, but suffice to say that this is what's contained in the Oahspe. Right? It was just a size part to tell you about what they were saying in 1937 about the book and the author. Right? I'm gonna come back. We'll start from chapter 1, verse 13 in the prayer of Ta'i.